Okay, here we go with video number 3. As I promised in the last video, today I will discuss the Holma Brown, which I think it's kind of funny because when it was all said and done, the Holma Brown might have been the most debated and hot topics of the entire poem. And I wonder if that's because more people were basing their solves on a Holma Brown they really liked and then sort of reverse engineering Warm Water's Halt conveniently to make a solve work rather than starting with a Warm Water's Halt and then moving down to a Holma Brown. Either way, I do think that that might have been part of the reason that the chest wasn't found for a whole decade was because people were probably starting with Holmes of Brown. And when you start looking into the Rockies, there's just so many possible Holmes of Brown that it makes sense that a lot of the intelligent resources going into finding the treasure were probably doing so with false Holmes of Brown rather than trying to figure out the first clue. But regardless, I just thought today would be a good chance to show this map. This map has nothing to do with my solve, so to speak. This is information that we have collected both before and after the treasure chest was found. So this is a map showing the regions of the habitat of lodgepole pine and pinion pine. And the reason I'm showing these two pines on a map here is, first of all, from the pinion pine quote, where Forrest, in fact, we'll just go back and look at it right now, where Forrest said, near the bottom of this quote here, it says, "If I were standing where the treasure chest is, I'd see trees, I'd see mountains, I'd see animals, I'd smell the wonderful smells of pine needles or pinion nuts, sagebrush, and I know the treasure chest is wet." Well, you've asked me a lot of questions. Most of them I've answered. A few of them I haven't. But I got to tell you, there's one thing I told you that I wish I had not. Now, many have speculated that what he wishes he had not told us was about the pinion nuts. Some others, because Forrest did come out after the fact and sort of took back the whole pinion thing, and people think maybe he did that because in the moment of kind of reflecting and imagining himself at the spot of the treasure, he might have been a little bit too honest and given away a clue that he might not have realized he was giving away. Others have said, oh, he never meant to say pinion nuts. Now, I'm biased. I've been a Colorado searcher for most of the treasure hunt, other than temporarily I was looking in Kerwin in Wyoming. But for the most part, I've been a Colorado guy through and through. And so I'm more inclined to believe that he was telling the truth the first time he talked about pinion. I also just tend to think, in a moment where he's reflecting on the location of the treasure chest, it's where he's most likely to accidentally give up a detail he shouldn't have. I also think that if this place is so damn special to him, if this is a place he decided he was going to hide a 7-figure treasure somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, I just have a hard time believing that he would ever make a mistake of accidentally or mistakenly placing the chest in the region of Pinion. Pinion being such a unique tree. It's not like a fir versus a spruce tree. I mean, we're talking about a very unique tree that I just can't imagine him sitting there imagining himself in front of the treasure chest and mistakenly saying pinion were there if they really weren't. But that's just me. I'm sure the Wyoming and the Montana searchers feel differently. But I wanted to show this map because with this new information about the lodgepole pine potentially being the type of pine cone that was identified next to the treasure chest in the post-find picture. Granted, I don't know if any professional botanists have opined on this, but based on the consensus in the Fen community, that was in fact a lodgepole pine, and if we are to believe the pinion pine, that could drastically reduce the potential area where the treasure chest was. First of all, the only possible state that would in fact be Colorado, because it's the only state with both species of pine. And even in Colorado, the overlap, as we can see here, is very minuscule. And it just so happens to be, and this is the reason I'm sharing this in this part of my video series, is that the largest area of overlap happens to be, so here's my Warm Waters Halt here, here's Highway 24, and if we zoom in a little closer, we see that the town of Buena Vista, which is, I brought it up in my video about the Collegiate Peaks, but the town of Buena Vista happens to be right next to the largest continuous overlap of Pinion and Lodgepole. So pretty interesting, and I think it's relevant moving into my next video about the home of Brown. So I guess now will be a good time to transition into that. And the first part of the home of Brown clue, in my opinion, is the part put in. What does it mean to put in? People have speculated it means that's where you cross the river. People have speculated it means that's where you change directions. That's where you park your car. But in my solve, if you go back to my first video, I believe the first stanza is telling us that he had gone alone in the cockpit of his airplane, and that we're actually supposed to approach this solve through the lens of being in an airplane, at least up until this part. And when he says put in other words, in this definition, to call or enter at a place or to enter a harbor or port, well, it's time to enter an airport because we're in an airplane. And so as we move down Highway 24, since that's the solution to too far to walk, we're looking for an airport. And when I first found that Warm Waters halt, my natural inclination was to look into Leadville as the potential place where you land your airplane. And it would be easy to draw that conclusion because there's an airport down here in Leadville, and Leadville is known as a place where Molly Brown lived for a time. And so landing your airplane below Leadville would make a lot of sense in that context. But as I talked about in the first video as well, outside of Leadville, there's a string town here. It's not labeled on the Google Maps, but you can see it on a topo map. And then you move south, and there's a ball town right here. And to me, that told me, okay, well then I feel like in order to satisfy these clues that I think I'm finding, I need to keep moving south on Highway 24 to find the home of Brown. And so that's what led me to moving south toward Buena Vista, looking for what I would have guessed would be an airport if we're trying to put in below the home of Brown. And so I got to Buena Vista, and sure enough, there is an airport there. And I thought, okay, great, I land my airplane here, but how am I putting in below the home of Brown? I know that there's a Browns Canyon National Monument down here, and that's great and all, but Buena Vista is where the airport's at. So how am I putting in below the home of Brown if I'm landing here at Central Colorado Regional Airport? And I'm going to show you what I believe is the home of Brown. So just north of Central Colorado Regional Airport on Highway 24, there is a Brown Dog Coffee Company. And I know the initial reaction, I know what the initial reaction to this is going to be because it was my initial reaction. It's like, well, you know, that is nice. I mean, Brown Dog Coffee Company certainly could be the home of Brown, and it certainly is, you know, directly above the airport. So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense. But, you know, how could Forrest base his entire poem around this home of Brown, of this small coffee company that, first of all, I didn't even know if this place existed at the time that Forrest wrote the poem. Second, how long could he reasonably expect this place to be around? If he's trying to write a poem that's going to last a certain amount of time, I mean, it did seem like this was not necessarily the best type of home of Brown to base your solve on. But let me provide some evidence for this, and this is going to be kind of a more scattered video. I'm going to attack this from multiple angles, from the book and from certain things Forrest has said that might collectively be enough evidence to convince you that this is the home of Brown. But so I'm just going to start off with something that I think is pretty interesting. So in one of the 6 questions on mysterious writings, this is what someone wrote to Forrest Fenn. They said, assuming standard day at both KSAF, which that's the Santa Fe airport, and I think that's the Santa Fe airport, and in the atmosphere immediately above, within 500 AGL, the bronze chest, 110 IAS, no wind, and uncorrected for magnetic variation, what heading would I turn to after departure from KSAF? How long shall I fly on that heading, and what MSL altitude shall I climb or descend to as to offer the bronze chest a flyby at 100 AGL? I didn't understand a lot of that, but he's talking about something with flying. Recent study revealed I'll be above 5,000 MSL, greater than 8.25 miles from Santa Fe proper. Thoroughly enjoyed the thrill of the chase. Respectfully, and this is some guy who is a fighter pilot. And Forrest says, I would do a 180, land at KSAF, drink lots of coffee, and don't let the flight surgeon find you. Okay, so Forrest is talking about landing his plane and getting some coffee. Well, here we have a coffee place and right next to the airport in Buena Vista. Also, he said, don't let the flight surgeon find you. Well, right next to that, we have Heart of the Rockies Regional Medical Center. Now, I'm going to jump forward to a quote from the book just to give a little bit more context to why that Heart of the Rockies Regional Medical Center being next to these clues might be an interesting find. I'm going to take us to page 63 in The Thrill of the Chase. This is from the chapter Looking for Lewis and Clark. And you might recall at the end of this chapter, Forrest makes a list of bullet points, the things he learned from his little adventure out looking for Lewis and Clark. And one of the bullet points he makes is, coffee made by boiling pine needles can bring on cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest? Heart of the Rockies Regional Medical Center? I don't know. It's not like a bullseye here, but it's interesting, to say the least. So now I'm going to go back to the book, and I'm going to give a few more examples of where I think Forrest might have been referring to this Brown Dog Coffee Company. Going to important literature. I briefly mentioned when I was doing my important literature video that the girl with the coffee was going to come back in my solve. And so on the third paragraph of that chapter, he says, just as I was about to ask the little girl at the computer about those authors, she raised her coffee cup to take a sip, and I swear that cup all but covered her whole face. I thought maybe she was trying to hide. Anyway, when she finished sipping, she gave me a nice smile that made me feel better, and asked me to please follow her as she regaled me with the reasons why we are so lucky to have great books in our lives. So this girl took a drink of her coffee and gave him a nice smile. Now let's go to the Brown Dog Coffee Company website. Because first of all, if this place wasn't around, before the treasure chest was hidden, then we're done with this place. But it turns out this place has been around since 1995. It's been a favorite of the Buena Vista and Salida local since then. And what's interesting is the slogan of this company is awesome coffee, tea, pastries, and lunches to our customers with a smile. So Forrest said that the girl took a sip of coffee and gave him a smile, and here we have a slogan of Brown Dog Coffee Company giving coffee with a smile. Interesting coincidence, I'll say. So now, just another example of that. We go to Scrapbook 112, and Forrest talks here about meeting someone at the door and offering a cup of coffee. He was full of fun and kept asking questions, the answers to which frequently made both of us smile. So talking about coffee, smiling again. Now let's go to page 27 in The Thrill of the Chase. And here in page 27, this is on jumpstarting the learning curve. And Forrest is talking about being in Spanish class, looking out the window. So he says, so on occasion when Miss Ford was writing Spanish words on the blackboard, I'd quickly slip through the window and down and away. I was proud to have thought of that idea all by myself. I remember the exhilarating feeling that there was probably a lot more ideas out there that were just as good as that one. Fortunately, I was the only one in the class who knew that trick. The sliding, I mean. And even though that rusty old iron thing marked the tail of my breeches pretty good with a heavy brown color, it was worth it. So he talks about going down this rusty iron escape and getting his pants brown, and he went out the window. And that's a theme. If you pay really close attention in The Thrill of the Chase, you notice that Forrest talks a lot about going out his window. In fact, it comes up I'll talk about this more in the future clues in my future videos, but he talks about going out his window a lot. And my personal theory is that whenever he refers to his window, he's referring to Buena Vista, which is why he said he was in Spanish class when he went out the window, Buena Vista being a Spanish word. And the word vista means a pleasing view, especially seen through a long, narrow opening, such as a window. And there will be more evidence for this window theory. I'm just getting this out in the open now. But Forrest went out the window, went down the rusty fire escape, and got his pants brown. Now, the word rusty was interesting because it comes up again in his next book, In Too Far to Walk. And I'm just going to show you a picture I took of the chapter here. And he talks about his dog named Rusty. So his dog, Rusty, we'll just read the first paragraph. Rusty was a very frightened dog when we first saw him near my mother-in-law's home in Belton, Texas. It took my wife and me an hour to lure him in with food. He had been badly abused and was so starved you could feel his ribs through his thick fur. He was obviously homeless. Home of brown dog. He was obviously homeless and had ample reason to fear humans. So here Forrest is talking about his brown dog that is named Rusty. Interesting coincidence. I don't know. Nothing like staggering here, but interesting to say the least. Now I'm going to jump forward to later in the book. I'm not even going to bother jumping to the chapter, but I'll just briefly mention it. In the chapter Bessie and Me, where he talks about his cow, he refers to the cow as a fawn-colored animal while he milked the cow, and then he talks about the tail being dog-chewed. So maybe some obscure reference there, but nothing worth getting too excited about. If we move to page 110, and actually, before we go to page 110, I want to read the last paragraph of this. And he says, Rusty, or the very last sentence, he says, he rests comfortably in a place where the two of us had spent so many happy hours together as I excavated in the ruin. I often wonder what it would have been like to have him as a pup and raise him with our grandkids. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce to you something that's going to be something I refer to multiple times moving forward in the solve. And this is this glossary of fox hunting terms. If you recall, the thrill of the chase is a term derived from fox hunting, and my Warm Waters Halt, McNamee Peak, is named for an Irish foxhound. And I believe that the theme of the entire treasure hunt was a fox and a hound theme, and that you start at the hound, and that our ending spot is going to be something associated with a fox. And so I looked up this glossary of fox hunting terms, and I think you'll be surprised as I move forward in my future videos how many words in the poem and how many of the clues have associations with fox hunting terms. And one of the ones that caught my eye was the word walk. And the word walk in the fox hunting world means in the spring and summer, hound puppies sent out of the kennels to live at members' and supporters' farms for socializing are said to be at walk. And so we look back to this part of this little reference in his book. He says, I often wonder what it would have been like to have him as a pup and raise him with our grandkids. It kind of calls to my memory the idea of that definition of walk. Once again, nothing staggering here. You're going to have to let me build my case little by little here. So now we're going to move to page 110 in The Thrill of the Chase. And this is from the chapter of Teachers with Ropes. And in this chapter, he talks about the teachers bringing the kids across the street to his gallery, and then he says at the bottom of page 110, he says, the next step in the process was also predictable. After all the students were inside and counted, I was introduced. The teachers started for the coffee pot in the back room. They would take about 4 steps, then the alpha teacher would turn around and say in a loud voice, now remember what we told you, don't touch anything, do not touch. The students seemed to enjoy watching the teachers disappear. And so the teachers would get all distracted with the coffee pot, and then Forrest would go to teaching them. And if we look up in our fox hunting glossary, it turns out one of the terms is, where is it? Coffee house, right here. When members of the field chatter amongst themselves rather than pay attention to the hounds. So the teachers were kind of exemplifying this example when they went to drink coffee and ignored the kids, or in this case, maybe the kids are the hounds. I don't know. So I want to jump forward to some of the scrapbooks. So we already showed you this one. So here's an interesting thing. So And this is going to be relevant when I show you a drawing from $17 a square inch. So Eric Sloan drew this painting, or he painted this, and he said, Eric said I was flying the airplane in my little painting. His smiling words fell softly on my willing ears. Such was his friendship. So Eric Sloan painted this, and apparently this is Forrest Fenn in this plane right here. Now I'm going to show you something from $17 a square inch. So here's an excerpt from that book. And this is referring to the chapter about Forrest's dog Bip. And so he said, Eric also illustrated magazine articles and publications that were written by others. In 1981, Sherry Brown, a research assistant, gave me a birthday present. It was a hardback book written especially for me and published by Northland Press. In a single copy, the 40-page story was about my Dachshund's art career. Eric went along with the spoof and illustrated it with 7 drawings. Now, what I think is interesting about this, so a lady named Sherry Brown drew this picture of Bip in his house, and Eric put this plane, or no, Forrest put this plane flying over the top of this dog in a house here. He didn't do this on any other page in his book. This is the only page that has this little airplane on it. But it's flying over a dog in a house in a book written by a Sherry Brown. So you have a brown dog with a plane flying over it, very similar to my solution to the home of Brown. Just an interesting little coincidence there. Now looking at a few other scrapbooks here. Here's the winter's warning in October of 2018. Forrest said, I woke up to the snow on the ground this morning in Santa Fe in a tent below freezing. I went out to get the paper and about froze. Hopefully all searchers will stay by the fire drinking hot Ovaltine until about May or June. So hot Ovaltine, maybe in association with a coffee shop. I don't know. Here Forrest, in another scrapbook, in Scrapbook 215, he says, sometimes when I write stories like this, I feel really good when I'm done. Maybe I'll make some hot chocolate and pet my dog. Here we go, an association with hot chocolate and a dog. I don't know. Here Forrest talks about, this is the scrapbook talking about this friend George, I don't even know how you say that last name, and Forrest, towards the end of that, he talks about the brown hat I wear so proudly was George's. He wore it while his hunters killed 28 grizzlies out there just east of Yellowstone. He placed it on my head beside a campfire one night and said, fits you like a glass fits water, so I want you to have it. George died last year at age 91, and his passage went largely unnoticed, save for a scant few guys like me and some relatives. But the coyotes in the sagebrush know he's gone, and so do the tall pines, under which he sat and drank coffee from a tin cup. So he talks about his brown hat, talks about drinking coffee from a tin cup, and I'm going to show you something kind of interesting. So here's our home of Brown, and if you go west in Buena Vista, just over these mountains right here, you end up at Tin Cup, Colorado. Once again, I have no idea if Forrest meant to put some kind of cryptic meaning in that scrapbook, but just another interesting little find. Moving to this scrapbook, I'm toasting myself with hot chocolate today because 48 years ago I was shot down. So he's talking about airplanes and hot chocolate again. Here is him with his brown dog Bip. I think later in this, this is another interesting little coincidence. So he talks about Bip finding out he was sick and he had to fly 250 miles across the Amazon to get a flight home. Well, if we look at Central Colorado Regional Airport here, and let's just say, or no, excuse me, I want to go to the home of Brown. So let's go Brown Dog Coffee Company, and let's just say we're trying to drive from there to Santa Fe Regional Airport. Or what's the Santa Fe Airport? Oh, that's Airport Road. We want to get to the airport. So let's... So here's Santa Fe Regional Airport. It's 249 miles. So once again, that's nothing like, I'm not basing myself on that or anything, but just interesting. And then here's another scrapbook from Forrest. So this is Scrapbook 246. He talks about his book, or excuse me, he talks about the oil painting he made called As the Bugle Blows, which, by the way, they use bugles in fox hunting, which depicts a time in my life that subtly underscores my passage through it. Maybe I'll talk about it at another time. And now to my country song called Cold Coffee in a Hot Cup. And here's a painting of a dog right here. So once again, nothing totally staggering here with my Home of Brown stuff. But I want to talk quickly about the little girl in India. So the whole little girl in India thing was that she couldn't get past the first 2 clues. And people have speculated on what that might mean. Now, if we're talking about an airport, well, the airport laws suggest that she wouldn't be able to get on any kind of connecting flight because she's a minor. So if she was flying from India, first of all, she couldn't fly straight to Central Colorado Regional Airport. She'd have to connect somewhere. And if she had to connect somewhere, well, she couldn't do that alone. So that's one reason why the little girl in India couldn't make it past the first 2 clues in this solve. And the other reason is, in India, they don't drink a lot of coffee. They tend to favor tea. This is a map of the world in which countries favor coffee, represented in green, and which countries favor tea, represented in red. And as you can see here, India is a tea country. So maybe that's all Forrest meant by this, is that this little girl coming from a tea country would never get to the coffee shop because she drinks tea. I don't know. I think that's about it. That's all I have for today's video. So I know it's not nearly as convincing as my first 2 videos, and maybe this is where I went wrong in myself, but I still think there's enough there to make an interesting case, and so I'll just leave it at that for now.